Hello and welcome back to Retfurb. So on today's video we've got this pretty poor condition Selle Italia Flite titanium seat that I'm going to be showing how I refoamed it. So you can see here there's nothing much other than the actual main part of the seat base that's any good. None of it can be reused, only this bottom part. So what I've got is I've got some closed cell foam. I think it was an inch thickness, which to be honest was a little bit thick. You'll see me in a little while slim it down a bit. So getting straight into it, the first thing I'm going to do is just measure out a piece of foam and mark that down on the foam and then cut it out. So we haven't got a big piece to work with, it's just a small piece enough to cover what we need. So you can see here I'm just rolling the actual seat base on it, just trying to get an idea of how much foam I need to cut out. So with this foam that I purchased it online. I think it was from a company called eFoam in the UK. And it was recommended that this is a sort of foam that you would use for this sort of application, so it's a lot more denser than say normal upholstery foam. I would say it probably could have done with being a slightly bit harder, but it was okay, it was fine when it was all done. But comparing it to the original, it is a little bit harder than this foam is. So you can see I've just cut that bit out now, so I'm just checking to make sure that I have cut out enough. And just marking down the centre lines. To be honest, I didn't really need to do this at this point, but I sort of did it at the time thinking it would help to make sure that I get it more central. So now just checking that I can wrap this foam round okay, but I found it really hard to pull it round because of the thickness of it. I think ideally I could have done with maybe, I don't know, 15 mil to start with. I'm pretty sure it was 25 mil this, so about an inch thick. So you can see here I'm just trimming it down to get it a bit thinner to help it wrap round. Obviously you do need to be a bit careful when you're doing this because you don't want to make it too thin, and then when you come to shaping it afterwards you've taken too much off and it's not any good for what you need. So you want to leave a little bit more on there still. Like this back section, again you can see I've left that a little bit thicker at this point. The front I'm trying to shave down a little bit more just to help that form around the edges. And the back again, I'm just doing the sides to get that a bit thinner so I can form it round, purely because when I glue it on it's going to try and pull itself off. So now you can see at this point I've just applied some glue to the foam and I've applied it to the actual seat base. So now I'm going to lay the seat base on top of the foam and then form that onto it. So at this point the seat foam and the base will still try and pull away, so I'm going to have to try and wrap something around it to hold it all together, because otherwise when I come back to it it'll just be all separated again. So I'm going to have to do this, wrap some tape around it. So I've got my wife helping me with a bit of tape, and she's just passing it over while I wrap it around to make sure that it's held tight, and then I'm going to leave it for a day just to make sure that glue's nice and set hard, to make sure that it's stuck properly to the foam and the base. So you can see that I've just wrapped it all the way around, making sure it's nice and tight all the way around the side, top, everywhere. And then leaving it for a day after this to let it set. So this is fast forwarding the next day. So you can see I'm just pulling off any of the tape, and again I'm just marking the centre line just to give me an idea, trying to get it both symmetrical. And I've got a belt sander. I think I had 120 grit sanding belt on this. So you want it fairly coarse so it'll rip through it quite quickly, and you don't want it, if you had it too fine it would take ages. But what I would say is you need to be very, very delicate with doing it. I know it's not exactly the tool to be delicate with, but I did it occasionally when doing this. I took a chunk out, and when you do that and you've got to smooth it out, you just need to do it bit by bit, just building it like further down and just doing it carefully and just keep checking it, taking a little bit more off, checking it was okay, a little bit more. It's best to do that rather than hitting it hard straight away, going too deep, and then you're knackered, because once you've gone too deep, that's it, you need to refoam it. So just taking a little bit off, and you can see there I had another Selle Italia Flite titanium seat that I was just checking the shape. Obviously it's hard to get it exactly the same when you're shaping it like this, but you can get it pretty close. I thought that I did a reasonable job of getting it quite close. A few bits maybe could have been a bit better, but I've kept on checking it against the other seat and just trying to form it as best I could, comparing it to that. And like I say, just keep taking little bits off, not going too mad, because once you do and you go too far, that's it. So I'm just sort of carefully rubbing over it and just checking, obviously again, up against the old seat. And you can see at this point now, obviously I've fast forwarded a lot of this. The shape is starting to come together, and then you can use some sandpaper by hand and just get rid of some of the bumps and stuff a little bit more carefully that way. And now the back of the Selle Italia seat, it's got that small little notch on the back that's cut out, so again you need to be very careful when you're doing this, just going over gently with a belt sander and then just finishing it off a bit more accurately with the sandpaper, just as by hand. So you can see at this point it's pretty much there. I'm happy with the shape of it. I think it looks pretty good like that. So now we can go back in and get it covered. So again, just showing the shape. And I've got some nice genuine leather here, and I'm just using some aerosol auto adhesive. So I'm just going to apply some glue to both pieces, the leather and the actual seat base. So you just want to put a few coats on here. You don't want to go too mad, you don't want it soaking wet, but you want it to be nice and evenly covered, and then allow that to tack off. This glue is better when you allow it to tack off a little bit in between, then it bonds quite quick. Now you can do it and fit it when it's a little bit wetter, and it will allow you to move it around a bit more, but it's not ideal. I don't like doing like that too much. So now this is a little bit into the future. This both sort of tacked over a little bit, probably 10 minutes, and now I can lay it onto the piece of leather and just very carefully get it central, and then pulling it down towards the opposite end of the seat from where I've attached the adhesive part first, and then just stretching it as you're going. You want to try and get it on there relatively quickly. You don't want to be pulling it on and off all the time, because you run the risk of pulling up some foam. So you want to be trying to sort of stick it down within a couple of goes ideally, and pulling it round. You know, it's inevitable you will have to pull it off a little bit at times, but you, like I say, you just run that risk of pulling off the foam, especially when it's a new fresh foam like this. You could end up pulling chunks off of it, so that's just something to be mindful whilst you're doing it. Now the beauty of using the real leather, and this is 1mm thick leather, which I always recommend to use. It's a lot more formable, it stretches really well, you can pull it around the contours. Now compared to synthetic leathers or thicker leathers, they're just a lot more harder to work with. The thicker leather I'd rather work with than a thinner fake vinyl, leather. That's just a nightmare. So yeah, it is better to use genuine leather if you can, and yeah, it makes life a lot easier for pulling it all around. You do have to be still quite careful with it, you don't want to tear it, and also you can pull off the surface. If you stick glue onto the surface that get on your hands and it sticks well to the surface, it will pull that upper layer off occasionally. I've actually had that myself on a seat previously, so I'm very careful to keep my hands really clean in the process of doing it, making sure I've got no glue on there, and if I do, I just get a bit of solvent-based degreaser and wipe my hand off. It's alright if you get a little bit of glue on there. I'm just saying, if it's stuck to your finger and then you stick it to the outside of the leather, you sometimes run the risk of pulling that outer layer off. But yeah, you can see now that it's forming around really well. I've just trimmed off a lot of the excess around the edges, and then we can carry on and start folding that over and just trimming off a little bit more here. You can trim it afterwards, which is what I will do. Once I've stuck it over and smoothed it out as best I can, I will go back in with the blade at the end and just trim off a load of the excess underneath. Now this seat, it obviously had quite a bit of like gaffer tape underneath, or duct tape, whatever you like to call it. It was holding the old original dodgy covering on, so that's still underneath. I struggled to get that off. I did try going over a bit of solvent-based degreaser, but it just wouldn't touch it. So I thought I'd leave it as it is. I didn't want to go in messing around, especially after the covering was on there. And you can see there at the moment just how well it's forming in. A lot of the wrinkles are coming out underneath. Inevitably you will get a little bit underneath, but the majority of it will be gone, and there's tucking it around the rails. And now on to the most difficult bit of the whole seat, which is always the nose. Always find it real difficult because it's so tight, and you've got to fold it in around to try and get rid of those wrinkles. Now I've left a little bit of excess at this point just to pull it around a bit tighter. And now we can go in with the scissors and just trim off a bit more, just to get rid of some of that excess to make it easier to pull in around. Once you've got it pulled on the sides, you don't really need that excess underneath. You just need enough to go under so it'll stick down and hold in place. And now I've actually, on this video, got a plastic little tool which I'm just pushing the side bits down next to the rail. I always say on my videos when I do the seats, don't use anything sharp, and I end up using a flathead screwdriver, totally contradicting what I've said. So yeah, it's better to use something like this. You just, when you use something which is sharp, you obviously run that risk of pushing it through the material, which you don't want to do. So yeah, you're better off if you've got something which is a blunter that you can push it in round. It's a lot better. You can see there the seat's gradually starting to come together now. Just that nose section, which is the main part that needs to be done now. Just carefully working round, keep pulling it round, just lipping it in under, and as you're doing it, just make sure you're not leaving any wrinkles on the side, or as minimal as you can. And you can see there it's folding in nicely now. It's nice and smooth on the outside where I've got rid of the wrinkles, and now just tucking it in those little bits. And just going in and trimming any little bits to make it fit nicer. So we're nearly done now for the actual covering of the leather. You can see I'm just going around pushing down, making sure it's stuck nicely all round. So you just go around with the tool, just pushing around all the edges underneath, and just make sure that it's stuck down properly. Particularly that nose area. Sometimes I like to use the handle of a screwdriver, a small screwdriver, just to push in around there and get that nice and tight. And as I said earlier, just going around afterwards, just trimming some of that excess off, just making it look a little bit tidier. And we're just about there for the leather. So, you know, that's the process of covering it. And now I'm just going to put on the heat press vinyl, which I've made. So there's the Selle Italia logo that goes on the back in the little notch on the back of the seat. And then you've got the two titanium either side and the middle, and the Flite logos on the front sides of the seat. So just a case of putting it on the leather, covering it with some heatproof paper, then going over with the iron, and then peeling off, just making sure that it's stuck down okay. If it hasn't stuck down okay, once you've peeled the transfer paper off, you can then go back over again. You can put the paper back on and then go back over with the iron. And that's about it. You can see there it's come out really well. I'm really happy with how this has come out. It's the first one that I've done a full foam replacement on. So yeah, I was quite happy with how it came out, to be honest. As you can see, it looks really good. The shape is pretty much there. I would say maybe a little bit flatter on the top at the back, possibly. But overall, I think it looks really good, and it saved the seat from being just chucked out, and it can be used again. And yeah, I think it will look really nice on a build. But yeah, not a lot else I can say. Let me know what you think. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. It's really appreciated. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.